Tom Quayle, Jazz Fusion Guitarist, Sonic Sorcery podcast. And this chapter is called Why Does 5 Lead to 1?
I asked him, this man who has studied this his entire life and written so much music, and I said, why does 5 lead to 1? And because if anyone is unaware, 5 leading to 1 in terms of chords, the 5 chord leading to the 1 chord, this is like the golden rule of harmony, Western harmony. 5 leads to 1. Everybody knows that 5 leads to 1. So why does 5 lead to 1? He's like, I don't know. And I said, that was honestly like one of the biggest turning points in my musical career. To have this guru of harmony, I asked him the most basic, why does it happen?
Is there a mathematical reason for it? I think I've heard that. I don't know that, by the way, because I'm not a mathematician, but pure musically speaking, it's the way that Western music is arranged. You could ask the question why about a lot of artistic things, like why in chess can you move the king 2 squares if you do a short castling? It's just a rule, right? We agreed on that rule, but it doesn't mean that the chess game itself can produce some kind of beauty or coherent system within it. And music has been arranged in this way that the 5 chord leads to 1 most naturally because of the 2 lead tones, one leading to the root of the 1 chord and one leading to the 3rd. So if we have a 7 chord, like if we have G7, this F leads to an E, and this B leads to a C, right? That's the way we agreed that's the way music grew in the Western, that's what he said, Western harmony. It doesn't work in other harmony systems or other music systems, but in Western harmony, that's the rule, right? 5, or it's not the rule, it's the way music is arranged. 5 leads to 1, 4 also leads to 1, because it has a lead tone to the 3rd, but it doesn't mean that 5 always needs to go to 1. That's if we call 1 the solution, and we call 5 the most tension and 4 medium tension, then we have many options. We can do high tension to the solution. We could do low tension to the solution. We could do high tension to low tension to the solution. We could do low tension to high tension to the solution, and any other combination. We could do high tension to low tension to high tension to low tension to solution to low tension, right? So it's only 3 functions. You can rearrange them in any way they want. So 5 doesn't necessarily lead to 1. It's just something that happens a lot.
And he says, I don't know. And I mean, of course, we all have why does 5 lead to 1? I can tell you 10,000 reasons why 5 leads to 1, I think, but that little phrase in itself refigured my whole way of understanding music, in a moment.
It's totally fascinating to me, this whole concept, because why does 5 lead to 1? I mean, I mentioned the harmonic series before, which is something that happens naturally within, it's a natural occurrence. And that if that's laid out in a certain way and certain tones are put with other tones, that there is a pull to another series of tones. It's just bizarre. And I don't know whether it's human conditioning.
It's bizarre that the king can move 2 squares with the short castling. It's bizarre because in all the other parts, it can only move 1 square, which is also really bizarre that a horse can jump over a pawn. It's just the way that we arranged this game, that the game was arranged. It's not bizarre, it's just the rules.
Whether we've heard it so many times that now we can't unhear it, and if you went somewhere else in the world, they wouldn't be able to hear it. I don't know enough about that as to whether that's the case. Obviously, you go to North India, and it's a completely different setup of, both rhythmically and harmonically.
We can go close to home. We can go to Turkey, go to Taksim music, and I've heard a lot of that because in my conservatory, my university, there's a whole Turkish department, and I've been part of many of those exams because they always need somebody outside of the department also to be part of it. And it's a mystery to me, like how can they tell what's good and not? Oftentimes, I don't know. I mean, I can hear if somebody can play their instrument well, but most of them can, or all of them can, because otherwise they wouldn't have been accepted. But they hear stuff in there that I don't really hear, because there's no chords. So it's all melody, but there are strict rules. Like, for instance, if you have a scale, I think there's 72 notes. There's 24 notes per octave, 48, I don't know. There's many notes per octave, and then you have to choose a certain selection of it to make a certain mode. But you cannot just play the mode freely like in jazz, like we played all the notes. Now you have to introduce new notes in a certain way. If you don't do that, you're breaking the rules of the music and nobody likes it. It's like, oh, this is like awful interpretation because you introduced that fourth note way too early or something. I don't hear the difference between them doing it and they're not doing it. But I trust the experts that they can hear it and they've grown up with it and they've heard the music, played at the highest level, the highest aesthetically pleasing level that grew in that way in that culture. And all the musicians, they can hear it. And that's not because they're just looking for mistakes, but it's just the way they hear the music. I don't hear it because I'm not brought up in the culture. But then to say it's bizarre that they have to wait until they introduce that note, it's not bizarre. It's the way that music works. It's almost like a game.
Harmonically, it's a completely different setup, and South India is different again. Various different parts of the world treat music very differently. But is that a human condition that 5 leads to 1? I don't know. Why does that happen in nature? It's a natural. I know it doesn't happen in nature per se, but it's a natural process. It's not.
But here's the thing, though. I want to say, like 5 also leads to 4, right? If I have a G to F, it also leads there because G has a B in it. It also kind of leads to 4. That's what I meant. Like all these functions, there's not a set order that the functions have to work. Now, do a lot of songs use the same structure? Yes, but it doesn't have to be that way. A good composer in jazz, for instance, Wayne Shorter, still, not all everything is functional anymore. But I'm trying to think of a functional composer that is really a good example of not always following this 5 to 1. I can't think of it now, but Wayne Shorter probably has some stuff like Infant Eyes. I have to think about it more, but my point still stands. Like 5 leads to 1, yes, but it also kind of leads to 4, and 1 also kind of leads to 5, right? Because then the notes just go the other way. So leading, I'm not sure that's the right word. We say lead notes, but that just means that those notes only have to move a half step to go to the next chord, to those notes in the next chord. Leading is maybe the wrong word. 5 doesn't necessarily lead to 1. 5 can go to 1 in a very nice way, but can also go to 4 in a very nice way.
It's just something that we just discovered that existed in the universe. It's very, very bizarre.
I don't think that's true, though. That would be the same like saying in the Turkish music that we just discovered that we have to introduce this fifth. We can only introduce the 5th note of the scale after we've played this. I don't know. I don't know the rules of Turkish music, right? So don't quote me on this thing. But I've been part of enough exams to know that there are strict rules, and didn't exist. It was invented by humans, and it created beautiful sounds that people really connected to. So that's the way it is.
Bizarre, incredible.
Exactly. And I think it touches on a really important point here about kind of reality and science and everything all together, which is that what we're essentially doing with our language is describing what happens, not describing why something happens. Maybe given within a kind of framework, if we ignore all this stuff we don't understand and say, within this little kind of view, yeah, this leads to this because of this. But then like a child, the child, why? But why? But why? But why? Until the parent is like,
because it sounds good.
And that moment of this, that's the point, right? You don't actually get to something concrete. The more that you ask why, it just dissolves into like, why is anything, And that's what this moment did for me, because his book is so wrapped around the harmonic series. It is the through line through the entire thing. Maps it out, how to sing it, how to feel it, how that evolves.
Now I wonder who they're talking about. I don't know who they're talking about. I have to look back for that. I'll find out later. But they're talking about a harmony guru. I've met many harmony gurus. The thing I want to say about that is that a harmony guru in one music style is not necessarily a harmony guru in another music style. But obvious example would of course be Western music and Turkish music. But even within Western music, somebody that knows a lot about jazz doesn't necessarily know a lot about pop music or about R&B. And somebody that knows a lot about classical doesn't necessarily know a lot about jazz. And somebody that's great in pop music, or let's say somebody that's great at jazz, doesn't necessarily know anything about bluegrass because it's very different. Or Irish music. It's all different, and they all have their own harmony gurus.
To harmony, why we use it. It's like the best book ever as far as harmony.
You're gonna have to get that book. Yeah.
You're gonna have to, trust me.
Right? I wonder what the book is, and if it also applies to bluegrass.
Yeah.
And anyway, so he's the guy. And to top it off, he studied with Pandit Pranath, this North Indian raga singer, for 3 decades. Like live with.
Because one thing in bluegrass, for instance, is like when you play in G, but also A flat and A because they use a capo, the guitar player never plays a third. They always play this. There's no third, right? So, of course, the violin player can play the third, maybe the mandolin, but the guitar doesn't. And if you start doing it, if you start playing, it doesn't sound like bluegrass anymore. What kind of weird rule is that? Right? That's bizarre, if I quote that. But no, that's just the way the music evolved. And specifically on guitar, you just don't play the third. You don't do it. You can do it in that run, right? And on the C chord, you do it. If you play a song in C, you do play the third there, you do. But on the G chord, if the song is in C and you play a G chord, you don't do it. There's something with the way the guitar sounds.
With the guy, bathe the guy till he died kind of situation. So singing, North Indian raga singing, is deep, deep, deep in his way of teaching, as is jazz. He wrote big band music in the 60s and wrote for Downbeat magazine and all this stuff, composed classical, plays classical. Ridiculous.
Is it a unified concept that he has for all of these things? I mean, in terms of his tuition, so he's not, separating those concepts out in terms of ragas and, a drone and,
So the thing about Indian music is that harmonically, it's not that complex. And again, I teach at the university where they have an Indian department, and I've been part of tons of Indian examples. But the most complex thing about Indian music is the rhythm aspects. What is it called? That singing, rhythmically singing. I forgot the name. But that is the most complex part of Indian music. It's also what Indian music musicians would say. And another part of it is like the form can be very complex. Instrumentation, but not so much harmony.
I suppose, though, it's all the same thing. I mean, basically, you have a central point of reference from which you hear all of the pitches moving away from, and then feeling a pull back to, a sense of resolution. Why does that sense of resolution, why does one pitch have that gravity?
That is not always the case, though, because if you look at 12-tone music, this is actually why 12-tone music was originally invented. Like Schoenberg wrote a string quartet that starts tonal, and then in the middle of the string quartet, it goes to atonal, meaning there is no pitch that everything gravitates to. And that's why 12-tone music exists, because it's to get away from this pull towards a pitch. And there's other styles of music that have the same thing. I think non-functional music basically also does that, although you can still have the pull maybe in a short amount of time, right? Like if Dolphin Dance has some 5/1s in it, but there's also parts where there's no pull, like the last 4 chords, there's no real pull there. So it's not necessarily true that music always has to have this. I think modal music definitely has it. That's what modal music is. There's a certain mode, and the mode is in a certain key. A functional music has it because it starts and ends on that chord. Not necessarily, but most of the time. But there's music that doesn't have it. I'm thinking about serial music. Does serial music have it? So that's music that consists of scales that have more than 8 notes, like 10 notes. I don't know. Maybe it's also present there. I'm thinking about Messiaen modes. Messiaen also, it's definitely there, but it already gets a little bit more murky. But if you go to Schoenberg and other 12-tone composers, I think pretty much it's not there anymore. In fact, mathematically, they made sure that every note was present the same amount of times in an even amount of bars. Think about that.
It's so strange.
There's
I mean, there's physics behind it, I guess, but you know,
I
it's
think
interesting.
the
Go on,
furthest
sorry.
that I can get with it, to, not that I can explain this at all, but it's similar to a process of factoring in which, presented with a given set of frequencies, your ear, mind, whatever it is, brain, whatever you want to say, will immediately factor what it's hearing and find the tone that generates all the rest. If it's unable to find it, you will experience the sound as noise. And if
right.
Well, that's not true then, right? Because in 12-tone music, you cannot do that. And it's not definitely, maybe some people find it noise, but there's really beautiful 12-tone music written by Schoenberg. Now, if you go to Pierre Boulez, that a lot of that I do find noise. I'm not the only one, because his teacher, Nadia Boulanger, who was also the teacher of Piazzolla, once remarked that she was very happy that when she went to a concert of his music, that they also played some Bach. I mean, Pierre Boulez is very difficult to listen to. I don't understand the music, but that might be my lack of education in that sense.
If it can find it, you will immediately experience a set of relationships that become instantly apparent to you, right? And there's an interesting analog to this in jazz harmony. Many young people and people who just go through life without listening to jazz harmony, especially really dense stuff, hear that kind of stuff and it sounds like noise to them, sounds like nothing, right? Especially when you hear, the chord is not held long, short little stabs of dense harmony, right? You don't have enough time, because this process of factoring can be.
In fact, I think this is not uncommon. This happens to everyone. If you just take any jazz recording, not a jungle recording, but let's say something after Charlie Parker, and you start in the middle, it will sound very awkward. So this is not something that only happens to non-musicians, even musicians. If you start in the middle of a tune and you don't know which tune it is, and it's just a random solo, it will sound very random. So you actually need the theme, or at least like the form in the beginning, to make sense of the rest.
Improved, your ear can improve over time to factor quicker. But if your ear has not learned how to do it, you will not experience a satisfying sensation when you hear some 13 flat 9 chord, basically. You'd just be like, this is trash, right? But then, funny enough, exposure to it, think of...
Though if I just play a 13 flat 9 chord, that sound, you can get used to that sound, even without moving it anywhere. Just that sound alone. It might sound awkward to you in the beginning, but you can get used to that sound. You don't really need a lot of education for that or trained. You just need to hear the sound a lot. I mean, Claire Fischer wrote a whole tune where they put the minor third in the bottom and the major third on top. So I play C minor, and I put the major third on top. Right? It's a really weird sound. It's wrong. It's the most wrong thing you can do. Put a minor third and a major third on top. But Claire Fischer, famous innovator, harmony innovator, wrote a whole piece like that, where every chord is like that, or like every other chord. I have to find it. But then you get used to the sound, and it's very fun to listen to because it's a new experience.
Like, think of the first time you had coffee, the first time you had beer. So bitter. Who would ever drink this? Eventually, you're like, where's the beer at? Like you're obsessed with it. You can't wait. You get accustomed to bitterness. You're something about your body can make sense of the complexity, and then eventually you want nothing else, right?
That's it. It becomes very addictive. Yeah.
I think that's a good analogy. Yeah, that works.
Much the same as beer if you're not careful.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, I mean, it is utterly fascinating to me. It's not some. I've been so obsessed with just understanding how harmony works from the literal sense of combining chords, that I haven't looked enough into the more kind of why does the literal sense of why does harmony work? The physics of it, the human physiology. Why does our brain?
Yeah, I don't think it that necessarily exists. And actually, it was just said, like, you just get used to it, and that's probably what it is. You get used to certain sounds following each other. But in the sense of in the case of Western harmony, it's only 3 functions, so it's not much to get used to. In jazz, it's a little bit more complicated because of all the extensions. So you have to get used to the voicings that are used, right? Get used to those sounds and find beauty in them, which can be challenging. Some people might never get used to it. I think you first have to connect to some kind of melody, and then get used to having the melody being supported by a certain kind of harmony. It's same with a lot of folk music. If you go to Argentinian folk music like zambas and chacareras, some of the harmony is quite odd sometimes. Almost seems like it's the wrong chord or could be a different chord, but at one point you start realizing, you know what, this is how this music sounds. And if you start changing the chords to something that would maybe fit in a classical paradigm, then you actually change the music, and the music doesn't sound like the music anymore. That's another example of don't use classical harmony rules to judge other music styles. Like don't talk to me about relative minors, relative functions. If we listen to the Beatles, they wrote music with a completely different concept.
Interpret it this way. It's something I should actually look into more. I think you've done more of that, haven't you? You've explored that in some more significant ways.
Hello, Benjamin.
Yeah, pretty obsessed with
than
it.
I have. Yeah, it's very interesting. I'd love to know more about it. You'll have to give us. I mean, that book sounds fascinating, but you'll have to give us some more resources for how to explore this further, because it is really, really fascinating.
It changes your whole way of understanding what it is you're even doing. When you say you're listening to or making music, it gives a whole different perspective. And I came up thinking theory, maybe like you're describing, as kind of, again, it's leaving out this fundamental why, but is instead saying, well, we know 5 goes to 1. So given that 5 goes to 1, flat 2 can go to 1. Did you know? Tritone substitution. And because of that, this, which is all totally valid and wonderful, because these are basically maps for making particular types of sounds. That's all they are. But the idea that these maps are the way it really works, is ludicrous, right?
Well, I like what he says here, but it is the way it really works. This would be the same as saying it's ludicrous to think that you can only win a golf match by putting the ball in the hole. That's ludicrous. You could also just win it by putting it in your pocket. No, that's the rules of that game. You can only win it by putting the ball in the hole. That's how you win golf. So that's music, is that it has certain rules. Like jazz music has certain rules that are very different from the rules that are used in classical music, which are different from Irish music, which are different from bluegrass, which are different from Sting. There is overlap, but it's not the same.
These are just stumbling upon things, little formulas to produce certain sounds.
Yeah.
And I always wondered, there's a fundamental question I had at some point. I said, are notes real? Like, or are they just like random things that humans have just picked up out of thin air and like, yeah, we like these one,
there's of course Pythagoras, who I think was it Pythagoras? I don't know how you pronounce it in English. Pythagoras, who was he the one who came up with like the 12-note scale, or like the chromatic scale, and then later on there was tempered tuning in the time of Bach or after Bach. Beethoven started experimenting with that piano, that tempered tuning. So there's a lot of development in this realm. It's not a coincidence. Like this stuff is all thought of and calculated.
They're actually like a fundamental thing. And obviously you're already onto it with the harmonic series and understanding relationships between ratios and all this. So yes, notes are real, so to speak. They're a real universal phenomenon, and their harmony is. That was a kind of burning question in me that led to finding this book and led to speaking with him and all that. So you're going to love it, I think.
There was a really fun thing that happened to me recently, which obviously I was fully aware of before this point, but I'd never done it in such a tangible way. With the synths, where I have a Prophet 6, and one of the oscillators can be set to be a low frequency oscillator. And as you go through the range, where suddenly a note becomes just a series of disparate clicks, and you realize in a very tangible way what sound is, what notes are. They're just a series of oscillating waveforms that just happen to be interpreted by the human brain as a pitch when they get to a certain frequency. But
No, that's yes, but there's also pitches between our pitches that we use. Like in Turkish music, they use many more notes between. So it's not. Yeah, we recognize as Western music, we say, "Oh, this is a B," but I think it's a mistake to call that a pitch and the quarter note below the B not a pitch. That's also a pitch. It's a B with an accent or something, or an A with double accent. There's a very Western view to look at pitches.
But as you dial down the frequency, you can hear these disparate clicks of the waveform. It's a very strange experience.
Okay, maybe he was talking about something else. Maybe he was talking about the way a note is produced by like sine waves or something. I don't know what I'm talking about here, so let's continue.
To realize that that's basically what you're listening to, but just very, very rapidly.
I know.
It's very strange.
Amazing.
Sound is odd, very odd indeed.
Very odd. It's like you come across a failing of your mind's ability to parse this stuff.
That's it.
And in doing
exactly.
so, it becomes a whole new phenomenon. And then you can combine those together and they produce chords and stuff. Like, what is that? You know?
I think, though, I'm not sure because I'm also a musician, I'm not a scientist, but I think there is science on this. I think there's science in this. You can talk about this with not so much sound engineers, but like, what do you call these people? Sound scientists? Acoustic engineers. Like there's rules to all of this, I'm sure, because a lot of music is basically just maths, and it was also a lot of it was invented by mathematicians, like the way we arrange the notes. So psychoacoustics, yeah, that could be the right correct term, but I think there's science in this. It's not a mystery. It's not the big mystery that they make it out to be, but maybe they're talking more in a philosophy sense, like. It's a mystery that we like these sounds and that we like the chords. Yeah, it's not a mystery to me so much because to me it's the same like saying it's a mystery that we enjoy chess or that we enjoy playing pool. It's just an activity that in itself produces some kind of beauty. It's great to look at a great chess opening or a genius chess move or somebody that can clear the whole table playing snooker. It's beautiful, but of course, it's random in the sense that we just invented that activity, or it was developed over a long period of time. But let's move to the next chapter.